There's no music if you have no body to play it with, so take care of your body first.
You getting into the gym and you lifting weights and working on muscles it's physical therapy for the benefit of your playing.
The truth is, nothing works like just taking care of the simple stuff. Diet, exercise, and sleep. Take care of that and you'll be fine.
Join us as two musicians and fitness coaches discuss strength, wellness, and fitness in relation to musicians, artists, and performance. Hello, and welcome back to the Tuned and Strong podcast. This is Dr. Jen Cabas-May of Tuned and Toned Performance.
And this lovely lady here is Angela McCuiston of Music Strong. And today we are going to talk a little bit, we're going to do some, we're going to try to define a little bit of nutrition terminology for you guys. So we have a lovely guest coming up, interview coming up. Bear with me here, a little slow today still. With Mr. Duncan Rock, who is going to talk about nutrition and how it impacts musicians and performers. So we wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork for that and just define some common terms that people might not know. You may have heard of these, you may not have. Chances are you're going to have heard of a few. So yeah, we're going to try our best to stick to definitions as closely as we can and avoid opinions. There's pros and cons to everything that we talk about today. We don't really want to get into that, just start with some definitions. Yeah. So I've got a lovely list in front of me. And I wanted to start with micronutrients. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most everybody, I think, has heard of these at this point.
I'm a little bit, don't assume. Let's not assume anything.
Okay.
Anything. Because I know, okay. I say macronutrients people and they just look at me like, huh? In micro, they definitely have no idea. So are we talking about vitamins and minerals here?
That's what we're talking about here.
Okay.
Yeah. So most people, I feel like, have heard of micronutrients more than macro, which is the next one on the list. But micronutrients, we're talking about vitamins, minerals, things that you find in, daily supplements, or they're usually, it's talked about in deep or brightly colored produce. So you think about, like, people say, oh, eat leafy greens. They usually mean like as dark as you can. That's why kale is so popular. Things that are dense in vitamins, minerals, that sort of thing. So if you hear somebody say micronutrients, that's what they're talking about. Macronutrients, that's the next one.
These are things like, these are the ones, protein, carbs, fats, stuff like that. Those are the ones that are, is there another one? That's like the big three, right?
No. That's
okay. I was like fiber. Wait a minute. No, that's a carb. So yeah. So protein, fats, and carbohydrates.
Right. Everything that you eat falls into, I'm not going to say one of those camps, but usually it's more dominant in one than the others. There's a lot of things that have, multiple, like milk is a very full food. It's going to have a lot of different things. I think it technically counts more in the carb, but it's got a lot of proteins in it and a lot of fats.
Right. So it's generally, like, if you're thinking about skim milk, it's got, the ratio is basically 2 to 1. It's like 8 grams of protein versus 16 grams of carbohydrate. So people are like, oh, milk is a protein. It has protein, but it's not dominantly a protein. Same with nuts. Right. People think nuts are a protein. The same thing. Nuts are a fat. They have protein.
Right. So that I think we should probably unpack those a little bit too when we're talking about, like, what's a good example of a carb, what's a good example of a protein, what's a good example of a fat. Protein's probably the easiest. The best example of a pure protein would be meat. Animal meat. You're not gonna, like, everything that you find that is a vegetarian substitute is going to be mixed with those other macros. It's not going to be pure protein. As far as I'm aware, that's pretty much the exclusively.
I think so.
Unless it's a processed food. And we'll get to processed food. So
we'll get to processed food in a minute.
When we're talking about natural foods, meat is the protein. Carbs, things like fruits, anything with a lot of sugar in it.
People think of breads and pasta, but vegetables also fall under carbohydrate sources.
Yes. Obviously, that varies depending on Right. Depends on what kind of vegetable you have too. You're going for something really starchy, that's going to be very heavy carb. It doesn't have as much fiber.
Let's define a starch. So starch, we're talking like potatoes, also carrots, maybe even peas a little bit.
Yeah, they're pretty starchy.
Starchy. Those are the three that come to mind most. Corn, yeah.
Corn, rice, tapioca.
Right.
They're all starchy.
Right. So if you're thinking of vegetables as being, so when people are like, pick a protein and a vegetable, they're generally talking fibrous vegetable, or maybe you want to clarify any vegetable, or are we talking fibrous vegetable? Fibrous vegetable is something like celery. Like think about the fibers in celery, or broccoli, or
cauliflower,
spinach.
kale. Yeah.
Leafy stuff.
Yeah, stuff that is. Eggplant's a weird one.
Eggplant is a weird one.
I would say zucchini. But eggplant is kind of, because it's borderline, but it's got a little bit more starch in it. It's still pretty good on the fibery side.
Yeah, squash, stuff like that. That's more fibrous. So think of stuff that's got high water content, stuff like, I think it tends to be more crunchy, doesn't it? When I think about it. I mean, broccoli and cauliflower are pretty crunchy. Celery is pretty crunchy.
How about this? The starchy vegetables are stuff that you typically wouldn't eat unless they're cooked.
Except for carrots. See, it's not a hard and fast rule.
Right. So you kind of, but this is the sort of stuff that, you pick up a package and you look at the nutrition facts on the back, and you can kind of see, okay, what's what here. There are some tricks to that too. So if you're wanting to know more about how to determine what's what, that would be a good time to, you can send us a message. You can send, probably Duncan wouldn't mind, Duncan Rock for next time. So yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about and you want a little more data, reach out. But for right now, we're just going to move on. I think the only one we haven't covered is fats.
Yep.
Fats are pretty much, you're going to be looking at processed dairy. And I want to be careful about using that term processed. I'm
like
talking
cheese.
Initially processed. Yeah, like easy process, like one step, cheese, yogurt, stuff, sour cream, or
stuff like that.
Anything that's fermented dairy. How about that? Not processed. Fermented dairy or nuts.
Well, the thing with dairy though, because you can get low fat dairy, right? So we're talking like full fat cheeses and things.
Right. I'm not talking about things because that I count that as modification.
Okay.
If you're reducing the fat content, but thank you, because I always forget that part. I never buy reduced fat anything.
Yeah. So other stuff would be stuff like oils that you cook with, like butter, ghee, lard, coconut oils, or any kind of an oil would be a fat source, whether it's olive, safflower, whatnot. It's that you have the different types of unsaturated versus saturated, and we don't need to get into that. I don't think that would be
not for today. But and nuts. A lot of people go, oh, have a protein snack. You can just eat nuts. Like those are fat.
Mm-hmm.
Those are fat.
They're primarily a fat, so that's how you categorize them.
Yes.
What they primarily are.
Right. And it gets into some hairy things when we start talking about beans, which are like half fat, half carbs. So we're not going to talk about that today, but when you start thinking about like, I can't tell what this food is, it's probably a borderline food. Anyway, so that's the basic overview of macro and micronutrients. I think the next thing we should talk about is what is a calorie?
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know how to start with that one. You go for it.
Okay, so I know that one gets thrown out a lot. It's like, calories, and absolutely they do impact, your digestion. Will impact your size, that sort of thing. Your not size, fat content. Calorie, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it is the heat unit needed to boil water.
Sounds right.
So it's interesting that that's what the metric is that we use, but that is what we use.
Mm-hmm.
So when people talk about calories in, calories out, there's some hairy stuff that goes on but it's, some people use that as an excuse to, it doesn't matter. I can eat as many calories as I want, as long as I'm, running every day and lifting weights and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't exactly work that way. But in general, fewer calories you eat, the more your body is going to have to dig into your fat stores. If you get too few, you're going to dig into muscle, which is not helpful.
Law of supply and demand, really.
Yeah. And too much, you're going to balloon up, put on a lot of extra weight that you don't want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. The next two I think are, well, no. So a couple of them are going to be things that I probably dive into a little more than you, but processed food. I know we use that term a lot. And
wait, so in
Yeah.
our upcoming interview, well, I think we're going to put this before his interview
Yes.
with Duncan.
Yeah.
We asked him about processed food, and he took it a completely different direction than what we were thinking. We're going to dive into what we mean when we say processed, but he was talking about like when you physically alter the property of a food, like putting it in a smoothie and blending it or something.
Yeah.
Not what we meant.
Like, you take a banana, you eat it raw versus you put it in a smoothie and blend it. That's step one process. Step two process would be if you baked it into bread and like, and so and he's not wrong. Like he's absolutely
not wrong.
Correct,
we were going a completely different direction with it.
Yes. And typically in the US, when we talk about processed food, and what we're talking about is things that have been like mass processed.
Yeah.
Modified beyond their basic form. So when I'm talking about things like, store-bought cookies and
the stuff that's in the middle of the grocery store that has a label.
Right.
Mostly.
Right. Like not the canned vegetables, because we could argue that they're processed, but we won't go down that avenue. We're talking about things that have like, you pick up the package and it's got 1 billion ingredients. You have to do so many steps to it that the food is almost unrecognizable from its initial form. Right.
Like, okay, if you're going to go get a bag of breaded chicken breasts, depending, I mean, what's all in the breading, what's all in the, what's in a cracker? I mean, how many types of crackers there are. Crackers are processed because you have to process all the things to make this new food.
Right. And there's stuff that's still okay. There's stuff that's better than others, but I know you talk about, breaded chicken breast. A lot of people think, oh, it's just breadcrumbs and chicken, and like, not if you read the label. Not if you read the label. It's got so many other things done to it. And there's shows out there too that will show you like, oh, this is what happens in this factory, and things like bleaching meats and like all sorts of weird stuff. So when we're talking about processed food, that's really what we're talking about. Stuff that has had a lot of steps done to it, not like I took a piece of fruit and put it through the juicer.
I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, and like I said, he's not wrong. He's absolutely correct. It's just not typically how we use that term here.
Yeah. Right.
And on the subject of those labels, I wanted to briefly mention additives. People talk about additives. Actually, there's a lot of advertising now talking about additives. And that is when you're looking at the nutrition label. If you go in the back and you see chemicals, or you see different types of gums, or you see colorings, dyes, anything that isn't clearly part of the food, that is an additive. So I don't think we get into that at all in that episode, but it is something that I have run into people not knowing what I'm talking about. I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
And then the last two things I want to just define in terms of what is it before we get into the different types of diet, which I think you'll probably take the first diet we go over, is GMO and organic. GMO stands for genetically modified organism, I believe. So what that means is that they have taken, say, if it's GMO corn, GMO potatoes, GMO peanuts, those are some of the biggest ones that are out there that are modified. They have taken the DNA of that item, that plant, and they have modified it either through selective breeding, or I don't know what else they do. Sometimes it gets a little sketch when you hear accusations, but they have modified that from its original state. Like if you look at traditional Native American corn, it's marketed as Indian corn still. I'm sorry. It's Native American corn, maize, that sort of stuff. And you actually look at that compared to what you get in the grocery store corn right now that is genetically modified. The two are like night and day difference. Usually that is done to increase the size and productivity of a particular crop.
Yeah. If you ever go to, so if you're in the grocery store, look at the difference of size between organic strawberries and non-organic strawberries, or just pick two different things and compare sizes. You're going to notice that they might be a little bit, same with like chicken breasts, actually.
Yeah, it's more dramatic too when you look at, because they're genetically modifying some of the animals now, but
animals too. Yeah.
I'll leave that alone. But especially if you have access to like a farm fresh or a local piece of produce,
the eggs will look different.
Dramatically different. Dramatically different. So you can test that pretty quickly on your own.
Smaller, all different colors.
Yeah.
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 I don't know that they taste different based on the color though. I think they said that the color doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're looking at like farm fresh eggs and they have different colors,
that's what I'm talking about. Not the just based on the color.
There's definitely a difference between the farm fresh eggs and the store bought ones, in my opinion. Like dramatic. And then organic gets thrown around a lot, and it's kind of become.
It's a buzzword right now. I think
it is a buzzword. It has been for a while, and it's kind of, they're using it to imply that it's synonymous with healthy, which just drives me up the wall. There is a process for getting certified organic, but people think that it means, it's raised naturally and there's no pesticides and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it just means that they're using different pesticides. It doesn't mean that it's a better strain of crop. Like, it's not like it's a heritage eggplant or something that it's organic, and therefore it's heritage, and therefore it's got more nutrients in it or something. No, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just, what are they using as a pesticide?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because organic doesn't mean pesticide free. If it was pesticide free, it would say pesticide free. Organic uses different pesticides.
Yes. Yeah. And you can really tell if you go out of the country, and especially if you can get away from North America and really get out there, you can tell the difference. Go out there, you start eating their food, and you're like, oh my God, this tastes nothing like it. And you come back and you go, okay, well, I'm going to switch to organic, because no, it's not going to taste the same. It's not the same thing.
No. I've never been, I can't remember where this was, but my dad and my brother went on a mission trip. I think it was to Honduras. And they said they had some of the best, I don't remember if they're mangoes or papayas or some kind of fruit. It was just the most incredible fruit they'd ever had. And I remember them telling me, this was back in the early 90s. And they're like, yeah, there's nothing like it here. And it's true, because it just, there's no farm. I mean, it wasn't farmed. They literally went across the street and picked it off a tree. And it just was growing.
Well, it's not artificially ripened, which is a lot of what's done in the US too. They have to pick everything at once. So some of them are ready, some of them are not. Like, if you garden for even 5 minutes, the plants don't all ripen their fruit at the same time. Like, it just doesn't.
No, and if you've ever had an underripe something, you know how it doesn't taste as good. It's not fully formed.
Right. Yeah. So cool. I think that's, for an overview, I think that's what we need to talk
Agreed.
about for basic definitions. So if you've got more questions, like I said, ask us. We're happy to talk about it. For the typical diets that you'll hear discussed, first one on my list is if it fits your macros. And I feel like this would be something you'd be good at talking about. So
I love this one. So I have a blog post. I'll link to it, and it's how to figure out your macros. Basically, and it's math, and I suck at math. I mean, like real bad. Like, I can tell you stories how bad. Like, I got tutored in math for not the ACE. What's the not the SAT? The other one, the ACT.
ACT, yeah. Because
I was so bad at math, I got tutored, and my score went down. Okay, I am that bad at math. I can do this kind of math. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna show I'm gonna put a link to it in the show notes. But basically, you've got, we didn't talk about this, but protein and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9 calories per gram. So if you happen to be looking at a label, do we have anything on here? And it says percentage of calories from fat. That's what that means. So
yeah.
But yeah, like I'll take you through the math, and you can figure out your own macros. if it fits your macros, is basically there are no foods that are off limits. So if you are one of these people that struggles with restriction and that it just sets you off on a binge, which a lot of them can backfire and do that. This might be good for you, because basically you take whatever your macronutrients are. I have to get this many grams of protein per day. I have to get this many grams of carbohydrates and fats per day. Whatever fits in that, I can eat. I think that's about it, right? That's in its simplistic form.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually did that on top of a different diet I was doing at the same time. I loved it. I really did. And it's easy now because there are so many free apps out there that'll help you with it. And they're pretty good. You know, you just need to figure out what you need to do. Like, what's my intake? And then you just input it and it's easy.
Yeah, it's great if you like to cook and you're creative and you don't like to eat the same thing every day and you want change and, you want some freedom and you don't want to think of anything as a cheat meal. I really don't like that terminology anymore, or a cheat day, or like, there's no cheating. There's living and eating. Don't get me started. But, if you want to get away from that, this is how you just fit it in. You want some ice cream? Does it fit your macros? Go fit it in. This means you probably, because that's going to take up a large probably portion of your carbohydrates or your fats, you're going to have to add extra protein elsewhere and take less carbohydrates from that meal. So it's math, but it's easy math. I can do it. You can do it.
Yeah.
If that's something you want to pursue. But that's what that is.
It's a really simple, it sounds so complicated, but it's not. It is so simple. It's a great one. So yeah.
Yeah, and it takes what we were talking about with macronutrients and gets you really into reading labels if you've not done that. So it really helps you understand a lot.
Yes.
And you were going to talk about, you had a couple more, right?
I do. So I think I'm going to go a little bit out of order here because I think this is going to make more sense to do it this way. Let's talk vegetarian and vegan real quick. I don't think that's going to take very long. There's a surprising number of people who don't understand what those things mean. I'm always surprised by it, including people who claim to practice it. We'll leave that alone. Vegetarian, you do not partake of the flesh of the animal or anything that requires you to kill the animal in order to consume something. So that means milk and dairy, totally fine. Any sort of chicken, beef, pork, fish, no. If you add fish in, you're something else.
Pescatarian, right?
Fine. Pescatarian depends on who's defining it. Some people say that means you only eat fish. Some people say that means that you eat fish and vegetarian. So that's a quick definition for that. It does mean things like you have to be careful with your cheeses. Some of them are made with rennet, which comes from the inside the stomach of the cow. So that's what a true vegetarian means. Okay. Vegan means you eat no animal products, none, no cheese
or byproducts.
Or byproducts. Also,
bone broth is out.
Yeah, you have to do vegetable stock. Everything must come from plant-based.
Plants.
Everything.
Period.
If you are going to go hardcore about it, you might have to change, like makeup, skin products, stuff like that. We're talking about just diet today, but that is the difference between those two. They are, this is going to be controversial. They are not inherently more healthy.
She said it.
I said it. They are not inherently more healthy. There are ways to do it healthy, but just like the next one we're going to talk about, which is carnivore, you must supplement appropriately. You need a doctor's help to do it successfully, and there are going to be challenges that you have to overcome. It doesn't make it more healthy, and it doesn't mean that anybody who's disagreeing with you is less healthy or more healthy. It's just that they come with their challenges, and you have to know what you're doing. We're going to unpack that a little bit with carnivore. We're going to unpack that a little bit with paleo too, and keto, which are all coming up because this is going to get into some branding stuff.
Here we go.
Yeah. So carnivore is easy. Carnivore, you eat meat.
Does that mean you don't eat cheese at all, or you only eat meat, no vegetables? Because I don't know that I've heard of this.
There are people who are literally only eating meat. There are people who are doing it as you eat just a ridiculous amount of meat and leafy greens, and that's it.
Okay.
So it just depends on who is.
Which would technically be keto.
Technically it is. Carnivore is a real weird one. I don't want to get too deep into that one, but there are people out there who are straight up just eating meat and that's it. And I think it's odd, but if it works for them, you know.
My bowels hurt thinking about
it. Right. And
gosh.
That is another one that I'm going to say, make sure that you are working with your doctor. If you're going to do that, make sure that you are supplementing appropriately. Because when we cut something out of the diet,
where are you going to get your fiber?
Well, now I say this as somebody who has items that have to be cut out. I have allergens, and there are things I need to supplement because I can't get enough of a micronutrient just through my diet anymore. I can't do it. So I can't.
Get it.
So, if you're going to do anything restrictive, make sure that you know what you're doing. Make sure that you're supplementing. You mentioned keto.
Right.
Yeah, keto and low carb.
Used to be called Atkins back in the day.
Yeah, low carb and Atkins are synonymous. I think what got Atkins in trouble, which is going to segue into what we're going to talk about here in a second. I think what got Atkins in trouble is the commercialization of the products. Yeah. Because Atkins, which was originally straight up low carb, it had a lot of vegetables in it. And when it got commercialized as you're eating a ton of meat, you're eating a ton of, fats and greasy food and
these processed protein bars made of soy.
Right. But they're low carb and but don't pay attention to the additives and the, artificial stuff that we put in there because it's low carb. We're seeing that now with keto.
Yeah, that's all people started looking at because I know my parents were doing it for a long time. They're just like, hey, but it's low carb. Yeah, but okay. So we went back just real quick. We talked a minute about how many calories per gram each macronutrient has. So when you cut carbs, remember protein and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Fats have 9 calories per gram. So you don't have to cut twice as many carbohydrates exactly to have, how did I say that? To equal a gram of fat. But if you're going to eat low carb and everything is higher fat, this could get into volumetrics a little bit, which we'll talk about in a second. But you can't just go based off, it's low carb, I can have it.
Right.
And I think that's where they got in trouble.
Yeah, that's where a lot of people get in trouble is when we start going back to these foods that are processed foods that are being marketed for a certain type of diet. I have very rarely seen a processed food that is actually appropriate to the diet that they are marketing it towards. So, like I said, Atkins was supposed to be meat and vegetables. It's still low carb. So you could have things like carrots here and there. You could have tomatoes here and there. It's not as restrictive as keto. But when you start getting into the processed protein bars and things that taste sweet, and then we start getting into some nervous system stuff there when it's sugar alcohols or so like sucralose, stuff like that, or
Splenda.
Stevia. Splenda, yeah. Splenda, stevia, stuff like that tastes sweet but there's some nervous system stuff. Leaving that alone. Just the fact that it's processed, they end up being higher calorie than what was intended.
Right.
So whereas you can lose weight doing low carbs, there's some penalties to that, but you can do it. If you're eating whole foods like vegetables that you have cooked or prepared yourself, or meat products, or even dairy products, once you start adding in those processed foods, your calorie intake goes through the roof. So, yeah.
So segueing this into keto, I think.
Yes.
Short for ketosis.
Yes.
Which is what the state your body goes into when it does not have enough carbohydrates to burn for fuel. It starts to burn things like glucose in your muscles and and other places, your liver. So then your body is in a state called ketosis. And I don't want to go too far into this because I'll say something wrong, but they do want you to, I think, check to make sure you're in ketosis, because if you eat too many carbohydrates, you come out and then you quit burning the stores is basically where it's come from. And you can actually get ketones or something that's produced. And that's how you check to know if you're actually in ketosis.
So you're talking about the diabetic urine strips.
Yep.
That will measure ketones and tell you, yes, you're there. If you're going to be real strict about it, you should be doing no carbs. So that means no fruit, no carrots, no, like anything that could even remotely knock you out of ketosis. No. And that's where I find it interesting that, we go to the Costco and I'm walking through the freezer aisle and it's like, oh, keto ice cream bars. I'm like, no. Keto trail mix. No.
It's not possible.
It's not keto. They're marketing it that way, but it will mess you up for more than one reason. But if you're legitimately trying to do that diet, that is what will happen. And if you are keto and you have not heard of carb cycling, I strongly recommend that you look that up.
Definitely. Ooh, I have one more I want to talk about before we segue to the next one, but go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, no, it was just look up carb cycling because there's a lot of people who think that you're supposed to be permanently keto, and you can run into some problems with that.
Yes. So PSMF. You guys heard of this, or rapid fat loss diet, protein sparing modified fast. If you guys know who Lyle McDonald is, he's like the original diet king from, again, back in the day. I'm showing my age because I'm friggin' old, but so I've got his books on my website if you want to check them out. Bodyrecomposition.com is his website. And this is not, yes, I do have affiliate links, but this is not like a promo for him. He takes the science and he puts it in a format that's easy to read and friggin' funny and very educational and easy to read at the same time. So his book, The Rapid Fat Loss Diet, is also called PSMF for short of protein sparing modified fast, which is basically you take the keto diet and you carb cycle with it, sort of, because you have things called structured refeeds. And he goes into all these details. And let me get back to this, because that goes into, when we say fast, that goes into intermittent fasting and the whole thing about fasting. Yes. What we're talking about with this specifically is basically he found a way to make a crash diet, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, safe. It's not meant to be done long term, but he knew people were going to do it. So he found a way to make it not wreck you long term, right? So and basically what it comes down to is you eat it's extremely low calorie. And I have done this diet several times, and it's a very good success. And because you do have these things called refeeds in it, which well, I'll tell you about here in just a second, it keeps you from going basically crazy because you know, on the one hand, what I liked about it when I did it is that you weren't constantly thinking about food. It sounds like the opposite, but you weren't having to think about what to cook. It was very simple. You were eating meat. You had to hit a certain amount of protein. It was extremely important. That's what this whole thing is based on, is protein. There is no fat in this diet, almost zero fat and zero carbohydrates. I say zero, but that's quote unquote. I mean, it's extremely low. And that's why it sounds like a crash diet, because it is. You do take a certain amount of fish oil. There are certain supplements you have to take. And then you do get lots of leafy greens, but you have to limit those as well. So you're limiting your amount of everything, and you're doing this for a very short time. Okay. I know that it sounds crazy as I'm saying it, but it's like you can do this structured and it will really work. But then you do something called a refeed, which resets your hormone levels, leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin's the hunger hormone, which tells you, if you notice, we'll talk about this in intermittent fasting, but if you notice you get hungry at the same time every day, and then you go on a vacation and you change when you eat, when you come back, you get hungry at that time, that's because you reset your ghrelin levels. That's that hunger hormone.
Right.
So that can be manipulated pretty easily. Yeah. Leptin, I'll be honest, I forgot what it does, but it has to do with your metabolism. So we're not going to get all into what all that means and whatnot, but let's just say it's not a static thing. And so when you're dieting at extremely low calories like that, your leptin levels can really drop. And once they hit a certain point, you're not going to lose no matter what. So you have to reset them. And how you reset them is with carbohydrates. Thought you weren't supposed to have carbohydrates. Well, you have this thing called the structured refeed, and he breaks it down into exactly how many you can have in how long of a window. Like it, depending on how quote fat you are, you could have 4 hours or a whole day. It's a really funny book if you want to check it out. And then that resets you, gives you energy. Plus, then you're like, hey, I can have my pasta and I can have this huge bowl of pasta and like ice cream and all these things. And then you go right back to what you're doing and you see but it's not meant to be long term. But that's
right.
That's what that diet is. If you haven't heard of it.
Right. And if I were coaching myself, a younger version of myself, listening to our conversation here involving that, what I would want me to take away from it is the concept of the refeed portion. So when we're talking about restrictions, when we're talking about these things that are very restrictive, like keto, low carb, anytime you eliminate anything, especially if it's a whole group of foods, replenish, not just what I was talking about before with like, make sure you got your supplementation, which you talked about just now too.
You'd have to have certain supplements on that diet.
You have to have certain supplements, but you also have to replenish your body, because this is going to be harsh if you start doing any of these and start cutting down. So,
and you have to limit your exercise as well. I mean, like, this is not the time to hit PRs in the gym. This is a good thing to do if you're like recovering maybe from an injury and you have some weight to lose and you can't move a lot.
Right. It
sounds like that,
or like bodybuilders, like getting ready for show. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yep. yeah. I can attest to it. I've done it. My brother's done it. And it's not as crazy as it sounds, but you do not, I repeat, you do not do this for a long time. And he does have a book at the end of how you come out of it and go towards more normal. If it fits your macros.
Because that's the other thing, is that people are like, well, I don't know how to get off of it, so I'm just going to stay on this until they can't anymore. And then they go back to their old habits, which is not helpful. So
don't do that.
Yeah. So that's actually a little more.
Should we go into intermittent fasting then? Or
let's do intermittent fastings. Yeah, I think intermittent's the most common right now. Everything else I've heard thrown around is pretty religious based. So chances are y'all already know that if you're doing it for religious purposes. So intermittent fasting.
Right. So again, I'm going to show my age, because this was all what was really popular back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I should say. So I haven't done a whole lot of research on it since then, but it's still the same basic concepts. And I'm pretty sure these websites, if you go look at them, they're probably still from the same era, but I don't think the science has changed. So, it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the two people that come to mind are Brad Pilon, which is Eat, Stop, Eats. If you've heard of him, his thing was doing a 1 day total fast, like 24 hours of fasting once a week.
That's rough.
I did it. It actually wasn't 24 hours. It was like sun up to sundown, like an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. kind of thing.
Okay.
Like
so
that.
More along the lines of what's done for a lot of the religious things anyway. So.
Yeah. But then you pick certain days to do it. And it's like a day you have less activity or something. And it basically, it helps as I remember, with mindset and stuff. I only did it the one time just to see if I could do it. And I'm like, this is not for me. Nope.
Yeah.
So the other one is intermittent fasting, which basically relegates you to eating in a certain amount of time, like an eating window. And the old guru of this, and I think he probably still is Martin Birkin, whatever. I think he's Swedish. I'm probably also wrong about that. His website is leangains.com, I think, if it's still up, I don't know, but he's the original guy. At least I think so. So his deal, or the deal there, is basically you take a certain amount of hours and you keep it the same. So your ghrelin levels are going to stay the same. So say you start eating, it's basically like if you want to skip breakfast, that's the easiest thing to do. You start eating at noon, you have an 8-hour window, you're done at 8, which I find that for musicians, sometimes that works well, because if you're, you play a gig till 3 a.m, you don't need to be eating at 6, you're asleep. You get up at 2, you have breakfast, you're out to, that kind of works. So, and then what he did find is that the eating window is longer for women for hormonal reasons. And he gets into that, which I don't remember. And then a little bit shorter for men.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, because that's experientially what I found too. Was I had some guy friends who were doing it, and they could have like the 6-hour window.
6 hours,
I'm like, I don't know how you do that. I needed
10?
like a 10 or 12 hour.
Yeah.
It
was like
it was
8
great,
to 10 was the sweet spot.
Yeah, I think most of my days it was like a 10-hour window, but there were a couple of times when it was 12.
And it's the important thing with this diet, I think, is that you keep your window the same. If you got to modify it a little bit, okay, but it's got to be real close, so it keeps things kind of the same. Plus, it prevents you from eating. When you're not eating outside that window, it can prevent you from overeating later, especially if you have trouble, or it gives you, quote, permission to eat later at night. but and I find it works well with if it fits your macros.
Yeah. So
that's the mindset to it.
I think, yeah, I think that's correct too. Yeah.
If you
I had something to go on with that, and then it just went boop, right at my ear.
That's totally can relate. Two concussed co-hosts here.
There you go.
The word loss is it's a real thing. So, but yeah, if that's something that interests you, I definitely encourage you to do the research on it, because there's a lot of different variations, but it all comes back down to a certain window. What I did find though, people are going to find a way to do whatever they want to do. And if you have any kind of disordered eating mindset and you want to go intermittent fasting, you might say, I've got to get all my calories in this window. I can eat whatever I want in this window. If we go at it that way, it's not going to work for you. You're just going to overeat in that window.
Yeah. Intermittent fasting was the last thing I added when I was being very strict with my diet. It was the very last thing I added, and it was the first thing to go out the window. Because the rest of it was no, and that was the highest risk thing that needed to go first for my mental state. So let's talk about paleo real quick, and then I think I kind of know how to sum up from here too. But paleo is the last thing on my list. Paleo is something that I've done for a long time. It's basically, so there's arguments for exactly what fits. The strictest definition would be, if your cave-dwelling ancestors couldn't eat it, neither can you. So that's going to mean you're going to eat a lot of protein, a lot of meats, a lot of fresh produce, vegetables, fruits nuts when they're in season, nuts and seeds, but not any nuts or seeds that have to be processed. So no cashews, because those have to be processed. I don't know if you guys know that. So that's the strict version. Dairy would be out also. You can do milk, but not fermented dairy. Nothing fermented at that point.
No cheese, right? Because that would be processed.
Right. Now that's where we get into strict paleo versus, I think I don't know the term for it, but I'm going to call it realistic paleo. Yeah. Realistic paleo should include cheese. Like, as long as it's a high quality cheese, like not
define high quality since
not
we're
mass
basic.
produced, not processed. So cheese in a can, no. Single slice American, no. Like
spray cheese.
If you're gonna go full paleo here, you need to make friends with the nicer markets, and you need to go to their fine cheese section, where it's going to be something straight up fermented, not forced to ferment too quickly and highly processed like the generic store brand blocks, right?
So we're on the topic of cheese. I've got another blog post I'll put in the show notes. It's how to make your own Greek yogurt. It's not processed. All you need is a little bit of yogurt starter, like kind of like whatever, and a thing of milk. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Yep. It's great.
Yep.
It's cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is why people are arguing with the more reasonable paleo. You can have things like it's so easy to do as long as you're doing it high quality or naturally. It's so easy to do. It just like, we don't need to be full on cavemen. We can be the cavemen that had a shelf in their cave for cheese fermentation, right? Like
get a butter churner. I'm Amish, but I'd like to think the cavemen had they figured out how to make butter or something,
So, right. So that's where but you can get too far down that process road too, where you're like, oh come, it's really too much when it's like you can't even have cheese. But then you get into the other side where it's, go to the Costco again. I see all this stuff at Costco. I love Costco. They have not paid me to say that yet. Like, paleo balls and paleo. Some of them are great. Some of them are actually paleo. But the further I get into, or the older paleo gets, how about that? Now the further I get into it, the older paleo gets, the less true it is on those labels. I've seen paleo snacks that were, they had chemicals in them. They had
paleo.
I'm forgetting the word for it, but basically they take they take rice, rice syrup, but it's not the original rice syrup. It's
Tapioca?
like the most processed. No.
No.
It's a type of sugar fluid.
Oh.
It's like corn syrup, but it's with rice, and they've extracted the sugars from it. It's like triple or quadruple extracted.
That's super processed. That's not paleo.
Extremely processed and very dense sugar. It's not paleo. So so that's the spectrums of paleo and things like we were talking about with, you got to be careful with marketing when you're looking at this stuff, because they will tell you that something is whatever buzzword they think you will get to buy it.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
So far, the only one I haven't seen truly violated is veganism. Like if it's got a vegan label.
Yeah, you got to be.
Oh yeah,
that's
because
really
people get
strict.
carbs. And it is, and it should be. If you're going to go vegan, it should be very strict.
Yeah. You can't have fudged veganism. You either are. It's like being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either vegan or you're not. You just can't.
Right. You can't
sort
say
of be
you
vegan.
are. Right. But so far, that's the only one that I've seen that hasn't had excessive marketing manipulation. Usually, that's correct.
There's one more we hadn't talked about, which I mentioned, volumetrics, which I think is like the old 80s term.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but I knew what you were talking about.
Yeah, it basically gets down to, we're talking about calories in, calories out. And this has more to do with the calorie density of food.
Yes.
So, things like broccoli, you can get a giant head of broccoli, eat the whole thing and have like 50 calories, 100 calories, whatever. You get 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, that is 100 calories. 1 tablespoon. And this is this big, right? If I'm making the okay sign, that circle. I mean, that's the difference between calorie dense, which would be the peanut butter, versus not calorie dense, which is the broccoli. So it has to do with volume and density. And I guess if you're a physics person, that might really appeal to you. But it's also why you can go eat a giant salad and feel full and have very little calories in it. And we're talking about a salad of like not adding a bunch of calorie dense things. Like
it's usually fats that are added in. I had so many people, bless them, be like, oh, well, I'm going to eat a salad for lunch. I'm going to put, I'm going to be really good.
Bacon.
I'm going to put I'm going to be really good. I'm going to put, just like some cheese and like the oil and vinegar on it. I'm like,
just go vinegar then.
You want to do low calorie. How much dressing are you using? Well, this much.
Quarter cup.
Go eat a sandwich at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. What's funny, I should have just shown you my salad, because mine was I got a giant bag of they call it a giant bag. I made 2 salads out of it. It was not a giant bag. I mean, like half air or whatever.
Well, volume too. Like we're talking about volumetrics here.
Yeah, right. So this was a giant bag of Caesar salad. So I took the lettuce, put it in 2 different things. So, if you're looking at, it was like dinner plate sized was my container. So that's a lot of lettuce. Lettuce is very airy, watery. There's not a lot of substance to it, mostly fiber. And I chopped up a bell pepper, which is the same thing. I chopped up I had 1 Roma tomato, so I put half in each. That's not a whole lot of calories either. If I did a couple tomatoes, that adds up, right? Yeah. And then I added the cheese and but I did a couple tablespoons of the dressing, not like the whole packet. I hate it when salad is swimming in dressing. Ugh, that's just that's what we mean by volume, because that's not very calorie dense there. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, you can go to town with that and start. Yeah, if you really like math, go that way. Or if you just love vegetables, you want to add in little things. I mean, I guess that'd be a good way to do it. Yeah, I don't know, but it's not really. I don't know that it's really a diet, as it's more of a study. I'm not sure. I just heard it tossed around.
It's certainly a concept.
Yeah,
that should be understood, because you're thinking, like, oh well, I only had this little tablespoon of peanut butter. It wasn't very much. Like, yes, but that was worth this many heads of broccoli or this many apples,
Okay, so here's an example. If you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, how many tablespoons of peanut butter did you put on there? Probably 2. How many tablespoons of jelly? 1, maybe 2. Okay, then how many calories are in that bread? That could be a 500-600 calorie sandwich. Easy. Right. Easy.
Right.
Okay. For lunch today, I'm going the volumetrics route myself, just kind of by rote, I took a bell pepper and I halved it out, and I took a can of tuna and put a little bit of mayonnaise and some whatever. And I shove that in the bell pepper.
Yeah.
How many calories are in that? You got a can of tuna, which is 100 calories, and half a bell pepper, which is like 50.
Right.
But it filled me up because it's full of fiber and water.
Right.
And it was tasty and crunchy. And a lot of diet foods are squishy.
Yeah.
I think that's why we reach for crackers and cookies, because they're crunchy. It's a texture thing. So
yeah. And that's important too. Making sure that you get your different textures in there, because if you're doing just one thing all the time, you're going to get really frustrated.
Gosh, you get tired of it.
So, gonna wrap this up here because we're a little short on time. We're not saying that any of these are better than any other diet, like one's better than the other. We're not even advocating for the use of any of them.
Nope.
Just saying that if you are going to use one of these, or if you have used, or if you're currently using, make sure you know what you're doing with it. Make sure you've done your research and not just like, oh, well, this is how you do it, but you got to have a way to get off of it at some point, or know nutrient wise what you need to do to make it sustainable. Like if you're going to be on keto for a while, you need to cycle, stuff we've talked about like that. And if you have any questions on any of these, or on any of the definitions, or you want to know more about, like, well, you talked about organic, or you talked about processed foods, and what are those and what do they do, or anything like that. I know we're both happy to talk about this.
Yeah. And I'm going to put all the links to all those things I mentioned to the websites and to the blog posts in the macros and the Greek yogurt in the show notes. But we would love to hear if you have one of these things that is your go-to, and you have a favorite quote diet hack, or a favorite, like the thing I did with the tuna and the bell pepper I came up the other day.
Right.
Oh, you know how to make your own, another fun thing to do is to make your own peanut butter cups. This is the easiest thing.
I know how to do it the real way, but you tell me your way.
Well, this is not the real way. This is if I had 200 calories left and I was counting calories. That's another way to do it. The Weight Watchers thing basically gets you to count calories, but with like single numbers instead of big numbers. Yeah. We didn't talk about that one. But you take a tablespoon of coconut oil and a tablespoon of peanut butter and mix them together, and I get the flavored peanut butter. So yes, it's processed, but it's white chocolate, wonderful from, I forget what they are, PB and Company, because I was obsessed after my figure competition. I seriously had a dozen or more jars of different flavored peanut butter. And I found that and went, oh, I can make my own. You stick it in the freezer, you mix it up, stick it in the freezer. So good. And you get some MCTs out of there,
Yeah.
How do you do yours?
So you said peanut butter cups. I thought you meant like the chocolate ones. So I'm talking about like you get molds or something to fill them with. You melt the chocolate, you fill it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, mine had white chocolate in the peanut butter. It's not exactly the same.
Yeah. No. I mean, there are things out there too, like the flavored peanut butters you're talking about, that they're making them now actually in the high end stuff too, where they're actually using real.
They are.
Real stuff in there too. So you can find those too. You just have to be aware of, what the macros are if you care about that. So.
Yeah. And the thing with the last thing I want to say about all this is with your diet, whatever diet you pick, you just have to find, what I say with my clients, you have to find your groove.
Yeah.
And it can change just because it worked for you 20 years ago, like the whole PSMF thing. I am not in a place where I can do that right now. I mean, your groove can change, but once you hit it, you just got to find your thing, because they all work.
Right. Your metabolism changes as you age too, like doesn't ever stop. So find what works for you. Please don't hate on somebody who does something different than you do, because that just drives me crazy. Like, we've all got our own shtick. Like, I know that you and I do sometimes opposite things, and it works for us. So
absolutely. We would love to have your thoughts. Please leave us a comment, share, subscribe, all the things, because I think this one could be really helpful for people and can set up some dialogue, but keep it nice. Okay.
Yes, please. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Hey musicians, did you know that up to 90% of musicians will experience playing related pain or injury over the course of their career? How many hushed conversations have you heard about a lingering, quote, shoulder pain, or a weird tingling in your fingers, or maybe low back pain, or a crampy weakness, or maybe you or your colleague just says, I just have to get through the gig, and you watch them pop Advil like candy, maybe flush it down with whiskey. How many times have we seen something like this? So many, right? Well, it's time we start talking about our struggles, our pain, our frustrations in a private space where we don't just complain and mobilize and blindly stretch, but we learn how to strengthen our muscles, our career successes and build each other up. I've got a brand new program that combines all of these things, and I want you to be a part of it. It's a community, not a workout. It's a community with group coaching and great content that in 12 weeks will have you understanding more about your body, what you need, and how you work so you can avoid that career-threatening injury. The 3 things that musicians don't want. We don't want to be injured. We don't want to have a lack of stamina. And we don't want to be clueless. AKA, when you hurt, who do you go see? Just a quote doctor? Well, this program addresses all of those things. You're going to walk away with an immense knowledge of who to see. You're going to be empowered because you're going to know what to do should you ever get injured, or should you have a colleague that gets injured. You will be able to actually offer appropriate advice. You're also going to learn about the body and the anatomy as it relates to playing your instrument and your own anatomy. And then you're going to learn how to build not just your strength and endurance, but you're going to learn how to design your own corrective exercise program. So I hope you will join me in this new program. It's called the Music Strong Pilot Program, Job Security for Musicians.